On this Wednesday night, the questions and the pressure piling on the Prime Minister about foreign meddling.
He's not interested in protecting the safety of the people serving this country.
What was Justin Trudeau warned about and when? Canada's top grocery execs roasted for their rising prices and record profits.
Your company is making $1 million a day in excess profits.
What Canada's finance minister has asked supermarket chains to do. Restoring their culture and raising their children at home.
A lot of our kids were leaving the jurisdiction.
One man's tireless mission to keep Indigenous families together. And clocking in, why scientists say it's about time the moon had its own time zone.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. There is no let-up in the pressure on the Prime Minister to answer questions about what he knew about allegations of Chinese interference in Canada's democratic process. Global News investigative reporter Sam Cooper has seen two high-level national security reports which suggest senior government officials were warned about intelligence showing Chinese government officials were covertly funneling money to Canadian political candidates. What is not clear is who saw those reports and how seriously the warnings were taken. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau took a lot of heat about this in Parliament today. Mackenzie Gray has our top story tonight.
Located in the same building as Justin Trudeau's office, the Privy Council is tasked with providing advice to the government. And in January 2022, they issued a bombshell special report alleging the Chinese consulate in Toronto facilitated a large clandestine transfer of funds earmarked for the 2019 federal election. Global News reviewed the Privy Council documents, which says the cash from the Chinese consulate allegedly went to an elected provincial government official via a staff member of a 2019 federal candidate. Intelligence sources say the provincial official is a current member of the Ontario legislature. The memo was labeled finalized, suggesting it was meant for senior officials. But when asked, the Prime Minister's office would not say if Trudeau read it or even knew about the report.
Questions.
In question period, the Prime Minister was under fire from the opposition.
He's not interested in protecting the safety of the people serving this country. He's interested in protecting the Liberal Party of Canada.
In response, Trudeau turned to an old talking point.
As both myself and the NSIA stated last fall, we have no information on any federal candidates receiving money from China, and that continues to remain the case.
But Global News did not report the Prime Minister knew who received money from Beijing, or even that money made it to the candidates themselves. In November 2022, Global News first reported the Prime Minister was warned China had allegedly targeted 11 candidates in the 2019 election through a clandestine network to fund their campaigns. Trudeau's former national security advisor believes the Prime Minister should have read or been briefed on the contents of the Privy Council document.
Given the subject matter and the seriousness of the allegations and the fact that we are either just before or in an election, he should have been made aware.
But one document the Prime Minister is aware of, a report published just 2 months before the 2019 election from the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians, which warned foreign states would target preferred candidates during the nomination process. And if they win, the help keeps coming, in the form of contributions to and support for the campaigns and their political parties, according to an unredacted version of that report viewed by Global News. Global News previously reported that intelligence sources alleged current Liberal MP Han Dong was aided by the Chinese consulate in Toronto during his nomination meeting in 2019. Allegations Dong and the Liberal Party both deny. The NSICOP report doesn't give examples of interference in the 2019 vote, but it did for the 2015 and 2018 elections, alleging a group associated with the Chinese embassy attempted to hand-pick candidates, and certain Chinese businesses were urged to make political contributions through Canadian subsidiaries. Donna?
Mackenzie Gray in Ottawa, thank you. And you can read Sam Cooper's latest report, which includes details on those two high-level national security reports. It's on our website, globalnews.ca. The CEOs of Canada's three largest grocery chains defended themselves today at a parliamentary committee in Ottawa. They are being called to account for why food prices are so high and their profits are so high. Loblaw, Empire and Metro earned a combined total of about $2 billion last year, and each of their top bosses took home financial compensation in the multi-million-dollar range. In some cases, that compensation jumped more than 10% in 2022 compared to the year before. The execs say consumer criticism about prices and profits is understandable but inaccurate. Our chief political correspondent, David Akin, has been listening to the committee. David, what have they been saying?
Well, it's probably no surprise, Donna, that it was the leader of the country's left-leaning National Party, the NDP, of course, that led the charge, blaming greedy grocery store chains for sky-high food prices.
We have families that are struggling to buy food for their kids in this country, in a G7 country. And they look at you and they see you making record profits. How could you justify that?
Jagmeet Singh and other MPs took their shots Wednesday at wealthy grocery store CEOs. Conservatives argued that grocery store chains are taking advantage of farmers.
You, as the CEOs of major grocery chains, have an oligopoly with only 5 companies controlling 80% of grocery stores in Canada. And you use this power to nickel and dime farmers and wholesalers to the tune of hundreds of thousands of dollars for many.
This is understandable.
But the CEOs, well, they politely pushed back on this political theater, arguing that their company's profits and their own multi-million-dollar bonuses are not the cause of food prices, which have jumped 10% in just the last 4 months.
Grocery chains operate with extremely small profit margins, which means we have minimal influence on inflation. On a customer's $25 grocery basket, we earn just $1 in profit.
It is no solace to struggling Canadians buying groceries to know that food inflation is a global phenomenon, driven by higher commodity and input costs.
Meanwhile, far away from the committee room on Parliament Hill, the country's finance minister was putting those grocery chain CEOs on notice.
Grocery CEOs have a responsibility to their customers, and they have a responsibility to all Canadians to work really, really hard with all of us to get inflation down and to get prices down.
Now, the solutions presented to politicians who are quite keen to lower the food bills for their voters have so far been pretty meager. A grocery store code of conduct, fine-tuning competition law, and even forcing banks to charge grocers lower transaction fees when consumers pay for food with their credit card. Donna?
Okay, David Akin in Ottawa, thanks. There is a bit of relief tonight for Canadians feeling the pinch of high interest rates. For the first time in more than a year, the Bank of Canada is keeping its key interest rate right where it is at 4.5%. The central bank has been raising the rate rapidly from near zero to its highest level since 2007. Today's announcement suggests inflation is starting to cool, but that could change and lead to future rate hikes. In the U.S., the chair of the Federal Reserve said yesterday American interest rates could rise farther and faster than previously expected in order to stabilize prices there. Now to part 2 of our series on the search for solutions to Ontario's faltering child welfare system. The Indigenous organization Nogdawindamin is being praised for its innovative approach. It is a child protection agency which represents 7 First Nations along the north shore of Lake Huron between Sault Ste. Marie and Sudbury. Carolyn Jarvis met the organization's visionary leader, who has been unrelenting in his quest to keep Indigenous children in their communities.
My Anishinaabe name is Zungabwe Makwadodem. It means standing strong bear.
When Carrie Francis became the leader of an Indigenous child protection agency in 2017, the chiefs had a clear directive about their children.
To bring them home, because a lot of our kids were leaving the jurisdiction. There was a big concern about that. I remember that.
In years past, babies were apprehended straight from the hospital. Kids were placed at great distance from their families and culture.
You need to start building something new, something out of the box.
What Carrie built was Nogdawindamin, an organization that goes beyond child protection, offering family supports and mental health services to keep children out of care.
Who's that?
Among the kids who were immediately returned home, Ethan Pocono and his younger brother.
So we both said it's over, we don't gotta worry about it no more.
Ethan and his brother were placed in what he says was a brutal group home a 10-hour drive away.
Still scars me to this day, still nightmares.
For 2 years, he says he experienced violence and racism.
You weren't allowed to talk in your tongue. You weren't allowed to do any of that. Staff would get mad, send you to your room, restrain you.
When Nogdawindamin took over, they found him a home with his uncle, therapy, and today,
a cell phone plan, a bus pass so that you
help navigating adulthood and rediscovering his roots.
That is why Nogdawindamin is there, is for our young children to be looked after and keep the circle going strong.
Okay, next category, animals for 400.
Culture is Nogdawindamin's cornerstone.
One-ish cheese seasons. And if you look on page 2,
it hosts events like this Anishinaabemowin language conference.
How do we say bead? Mani du manes.
To give young people a sense of identity and restore what was lost. In 6 years, the demand for Nogdawindamin services has exploded. But that's not the trend you want to see. Today, there are twice as many kids in care.
Am I concerned about that? Yes, we're very concerned.
Here, Carrie explains it's an indication of trust in a new system and decades of trauma.
It's because of the residential schools, it's because of the Indian Day schools, it's because of the 60s scoop. That's what we're dealing with today.
But dealing with the government of today isn't without friction. Carrie claims the province is shorting them $18 million annually.
Ontario needs to wake up. Our funding shortfalls are phenomenal. Those are true child welfare costs. It was Indigenous Service Canada that's been walking with us and helping us to fulfill the balance of child welfare costs.
The province says Nogdawindamin should manage within its allocated budget and continue working with the federal government. Coming full circle for Nogdawindamin will be returning the oversight of its children to its 7-member First Nations. And it's in the midst of a 5-year plan to write its own child welfare laws.
There's a different way. As far as I'm concerned, there's a better way to provide child welfare services.
And so to a love song, they dance. Words and melody, a blend of old and new, an anthem for Nogdawindamin's March Forward. Carolyn Jarvis, Global News, Sudbury.
There is a developing story in Alberta about an Imperial Oil tailings pond that has been leaking wastewater for 9 months, but the public was only recently informed. It happened last spring at a site operated by Imperial Oil north of Fort McMurray. As Heather Urix-West explains, it highlights a wider problem about how Canada's energy sector is being monitored and regulated.
It's a bird's eye view of a spill that brought 9 months of oil sands wastewater leaks to light.
We take these leaks very seriously. We have land users in the area that hunt fish and have harvest animals that could have been exposed from these deadly toxins.
The Athabasca Chippewa First Nation first learned of the spill last month, but wastewater had actually been seeping into the surrounding land for some time. According to the Alberta energy regulator, Imperial first reported industrial wastewater was seeping from its northern Alberta Curl Lake mine site in May of 2022. Among other contaminants, the toxic waste was found to contain dangerous levels of arsenic, a substance linked to cancer. Then another 5.3 million litres of wastewater, enough to fill more than 2 Olympic-sized swimming pools, was spilled in February.
Because we are small communities, small First Nations living up north, is that why they didn't tell us about the danger?
But First Nation members weren't the only ones kept in the dark. The Northwest Territories is downstream from Alberta's oil sands.
We don't have an agreement with the industry or the regulator. We have an agreement with the Alberta government, and the Alberta government's the one that's supposed to be providing this information.
Both the province and Imperial have expressed regret over how the news of the leaks was communicated, but the 9 months of silence is raising questions around what else the public may not know.
The tailings ponds have become huge, 1.4 trillion litres of toxic waste. And so there's a lot of questions about how many other leaks are happening that we don't know about.
The Alberta energy regulator says it followed all required processes, while Imperial says its cleanup efforts are well underway. Not enough for those who feel they've been kept in the dark, as they call for greater transparency from the oil sands and its regulators. Heather Urix-West, Global News, Calgary.
Coming up, anger in the streets of Georgia over a proposed new law. There's widespread outrage in the former Soviet Republic of Georgia over a proposed new law that critics say will push that country towards authoritarianism. For a second night, protesters took to the streets of the capital, Tbilisi. Police used water cannon and tear gas against them. The so-called foreign agents law would require non-government and media organizations which receive more than 20% of their funding from overseas to register as foreign agents or face hefty fines. Similar laws in Russia have severely suppressed civil society. The UN Secretary General was in Ukraine today, meeting President Volodymyr Zelensky. They want an extension to a deal with Russia that allows Kyiv to export grain through the Black Sea. They say it's critically important to global food security and food prices. The 120-day agreement ends on March 18th. Ahead, the risks for women working in journalism in Afghanistan. The United Nations says Afghanistan is now the world's most repressive country for women and girls. Since the Taliban took over, millions of women and girls have been deprived of their most basic human rights, forbidden from education, work, and public spaces, essentially confined to their homes. Afghanistan was never an easy place to be a female journalist, and now it's even harder for the few who remain. Tonight, we are sharing their stories. Journalists facing death threats, intimidation, and arrest. Shagufa Danish is well aware of this. She spent much of her career as a journalist in Kabul and now works in our Ottawa bureau. Here is her report.
If you turn on the news in Afghanistan, you will rarely see a woman's full face. That's because it's forbidden. The Taliban ordered female anchors to follow a harsh dress code. Ilham works under these brutal conditions.
Journalism was a dream for me.
But that dream is in danger. Ilham is not her real name. Global News is concealing her identity to protect her career and her life. She has been arrested, intimidated, and even threatened with death. Ilham recalled the time a Taliban fighter brought her and her cameraman in for questioning. A senior Taliban officer said this when they arrived.
I told him that why you have bring this issue to here? You should kill him on the street and you should shoot her.
19 Afghan journalists have been killed in the past 2 years. Since the Taliban took over, more than 50% of Afghan media outlets have closed, while 95% of female journalists in the country have lost their jobs.
The situation is worse than what we are hearing.
Rubina Iqbal helps relocate women journalists from Afghanistan to Canada and says those numbers do not tell the full reality.
Canada is a democratic country, but when see them in action, they are not doing much.
Journalists for Human Rights gets call from women every day looking for a way out of Afghanistan. Until the Canadian government speeds up the process to resettle them, they warn most will be stuck in hiding. Although most of her colleagues have left the country, Ilham is vowing to remain.
I'm going to be a hope and to be the voice of female, the voice of women, the voice of Afghan journalists.
A brave voice in a country where women and the truth are under attack. Shagufa Danish, Global News, Ottawa.
Timely solution next, improving how we track time on the moon. Former Liberal cabinet minister and former astronaut Marc Garneau is resigning as a member of Parliament. The 74-year-old made the announcement in the House of Commons this afternoon and was met with applause from both sides of the aisle. Garneau was first elected in Quebec in 2008. He served as Canada's Foreign Affairs Minister and Transport Minister. And before politics, Garneau was the first Canadian to fly in space in 1984. From 2001 to 2005, he led the Canadian Space Agency. It can be a challenge keeping track of time zones here on Earth. There are 6 in Canada alone, so imagine trying to figure out what time it is on the moon. Well, several countries are now planning lunar missions, and the European Space Agency says the system in place right now is not good enough. As Eric Sorensen explains, their solution is to develop a new lunar time zone.
If it's 8 o'clock in Vancouver, 9 in Calgary, and 11 p.m. in Toronto, what time is it on the moon? The moon sits above many time zones, but why does it matter? It's a distant, unpopulated landscape after all. But it won't always be.
And liftoff of Artemis 1.
NASA has started up moon missions again, and now countries around the world are sending spacecraft to the moon. Plus, private companies are seeing big business and tourism opportunities on the moon. The European Space Agency says it's time the world agreed on a standard of time for moon travel to ensure global coordination.
The moon is about to become a very busy place over the next decade and probably for the rest of its existence. And, you need an efficient and safe system in place.
It's like the growth of train travel in the 19th century. Countries needed timetables for trains crossing borders. It's why they came up with 24 basic time zones around the world. More if you count Newfoundland and Labrador.
The moon will become both a destination and a hub for space travel. A busy lunar highway with speeds up to 40,000 kilometers an hour is dangerous. Plus, time is quicker on the moon. It has to do with the moon's mass, less gravity, Einstein, all that stuff. It just means clocks gain about 56 microseconds per day on the moon. Not a lot, but in moon travel, precision matters.
It's just not going to be a big deal for people. But we live in a computerized age where time is really important, and keeping our time systems set as accurately as we possibly can.
Scientists will have to figure out a universal lunar timekeeping system, and nations will have to agree on it. It's taken about 4 billion years, but it seems time is of the essence for the moon to get its own clock. Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
That is Global National for this Wednesday. I'm Donna Friesen. Tonight's Your Canada is this foggy view of Osoyoos, British Columbia. We'd love to see your Canada. Please email it to viewers@globalnational.com. And thanks for watching. Hope to see you here again tomorrow. Bye-bye.